My name is COLM. I'm the Manufacturing Engineering Director down in Boston Scientific in Galway. Going to give a little bit of overview of sort of Boston Scientific in Galway and then move quickly through sort of our history in terms of lean and then move into the primary sort of talk tonight really around what we're doing in terms of assessing and changing our culture in the facility. So Boston Scientific is probably a medium-sized corporation, 8 billion revenue, 24,000 employees, 12 manufacturing sites, and we have 3 manufacturing sites in Ireland, Cork, Galway and Clonmel, and in total we have 5,000 employees in those 3 facilities. In Galway we have 3,000 employees, quite a complex range of products we have in the facility, 40 different product families, about 2,500 part numbers, and we also have 250 people working in R&D, so we're quite a big R&D site. We're really kind of 6 separate factories under the one roof in Galway, and they make quite different products, and I'll show you in a second. And then we'll support each of these factories has its own management team, and they're supported then by 11 business service areas like HR, finance, etc. Each one of these business service areas would have people in these virtual factories that we have in the facility. In terms of what we do, big ones we do would be sort of stents for the heart. You can see your heart here, your artery on the outside, and so that's the way you'd like it. This is the way they get, and this will be our customer base, and basically this will be a stent that we go into would clear the blockage. Other products we've been doing more recently would be sort of heart valves. Like a heart valve will be this sort of size using live tissue that we sew in place, and typically these go in through the groin, up into the heart, and then basically open up into this shape in the heart. So that would be a newer product that we have. Second range of products we do on site would be endo products. You can see the products in situ here. For people with cancer in the throat, the stent goes in basically and opens out and pushes the cancer out so you can basically eat and live a normal life while the cancer is being treated. You can see one here in the duodenum. You can see one here in the colon. And these are what we call self-expanding stents. So they're quite flexible. They're very flexible. They kind of, you can sort of play with them and tear them up. And they're self-expanding because when we deploy them, this basically goes down through your esophagus, through your stomach, into your duodenum, and then turns into your bile duct. And then basically to deploy it, the physician basically is moving these 2 levers, one relative to the other. And you can see it opening up there. You can see it opening up. So basically that opens up in your bile duct, and then it basically pops. This system then pulls back out, and you're left with the stent in position. So that's a self-expanding stent, and we obviously have balloon expandable ones as well. And the third range of products we have will be a whole range of balloons for all around the body. So if you have a blockage in your leg, we would go in with a balloon, and these balloons can be up to 12 millimeter in diameter and 200 millimeters long. They're quite big balloons to clear blockages. If you don't get that done, you risk amputation sort of a year or 2 later. So that's the sort of range of products we do. In terms of technology, a lot of technology on site. We're quite vertically integrated in that we make a lot of our own components. So we have like a polymer core technology with top of the range extrusion, molding, balloon making. So we would make like 45 million sort of components in here per annum. Metals, we have all our metals laser cutting from making those sort of stents that I was showing you. You can pass those around, you can sort of feel them. So that's really sort of the complexity of the organization is quite high. So in terms of context, you know, the medical device industry, it's a new enough industry. It's probably 30, 40 years old. When we compare ourselves with the automotive industry, they're at industry about 120 years, electronics 67. We're at a very early stage really in our evolution compared to other industries. So in terms of our supplier base, it's not as robust as it would be in sort of automotive electronics. So we do a lot of stuff in-house today that probably in 20 years' time we won't necessarily be doing. Price erosion, 3, 4, 5% per annum will be the norm in this industry. So you come in at a high price, but you expect it to drop over time. And as a site, we have a very strong record using lean. So we're using lean sort of 20 years. Six Sigma, we would be sort of very strong on sort of problem solving, DMAIC, those sort of tools. So why do we need operational excellence? So while we have a very good track record year on year in terms of continuous improvement, it's very much probably 80, 100 people on site would run a lot of the continuous improvement. We'll be 3,000 people on site, 2,900 who are not heavily involved and not even involved at all. So I probably have a staff of 400 in total, but probably 50, 60 of those people are full-time on continuous improvement, but there's an awful lot of people on site not improved. We're very metrics driven, which is a positive, but can also be a negative, as I would show. And we really have a mix of cultures across the site. We've no real deliberate culture. These were the sort of the context of setting the scene. So we start looking around about probably 4 or 5 years ago at what different models were out there and what other companies were doing. So EFQM, I would have a background in EFQM. We looked at a lot of shingle companies. We looked at this guy, Peter Hines, Professor Peter Hines out of Cardiff University. He's a very good model. We were already following the Laney model. Balanced scorecard we would be very strong on. We hooked up with a guy called Mike Martin, who's very good in terms of visual management and, owned the gap. And then we spoke with this guy, Frank Devine, who had this mass engagement process for assessing and changing your culture. We also did a lot of benchmarking. This is probably only half the companies that we went to visit in the last kind of 5 years. And I'd say I personally would have been in probably 50, 60% of these companies, mostly through the Shingo organization in terms of benchmarking. So what we saw in a lot of these companies was, that our tools and systems were as good as pretty much anyone out there. But what we didn't have was the same culture that we were seeing in other companies in terms of collaboration at the high end of these companies. The same level of collaboration, teamwork, trust in the organization. So we set about looking at our own culture, and that's pretty much where our journey started. So in terms of the Shingo, you may have seen this before, but this is the Shingo sort of guiding principles. So at the bottom of this you have two sort of key principles they have: lead with humility and respect every individual. Now behind these they have a couple of truths, and these truths are the basis for really the whole Shingo ethos. Now the Shingo stuff can be a little bit heavy, so we sort of lightened it up a little bit in terms of our own internal use of it. So we have these what we call best practices internally in the company, and they're sort of kind of focus on process, create a flow and pull, go see, and this key one here, obviously engage people, really is the summation of these two here. So we have a linkage with the Shingo model, but we don't actually sort of really put this up around the plant, but this we do. These are our best practices, and they equate pretty much to the Shingo principles. So engage people. So when we say engage people, what do we mean? So you have this head, heart, and hands you may have seen before. So you want people to be absorbed, you want to be emotionally connected, and you want them to be a participant. But you really want to see that on a day-to-day basis as behaviorally demonstrated. And that's what we wanted to achieve, that level of engagement. So we started a process. Because we're a big site, it was a big process. So basically, we set up with an external consultant facilitator to come in and ran 80 workshops. Now each workshop had 30 people in it, and it was just him, and they would all be at the same level. There'd be no supervisor, would be all the same level. So we ran 80 workshops with 30 people, and 3 questions were asked of the group. One was, and it was like a 3-hour session, what are the obstacles to our future state? And we laid that out for them in terms of what we wanted in terms of teamwork, collaboration, etc. What behaviors do people see today that they like or dislike? And that pretty much took the most of the 2.5 hours that they had. Then they would select one person from the group to go forward to a consensus day, as we called it, a number of weeks later. Now these sessions were to a certain extent, we were opening a sort of can of worms, and we didn't know what was going to come out. And basically in the last 15 minutes of each session, a director, there were 7 or 8 directors on site for operations, one of us would go into the meeting and listen to what the group had to say. Now the group was ran in a way that they have 30 people in the room, 6 groups of 5, flip charts, etc. And they basically had their lists of things that they had problems with. And each group, before the director came in, had to summarize down to 5 sort of issues and 5 behaviors that they liked and disliked. So typically when the directors went in, they got a near full, right? We were kind of surprised, but we got a real near full. There's a lot going on in the plant that we didn't know. Our absenteeism policy was absolutely abysmal. We'd brought it in about a year earlier. There was a bunch of stuff going on with supervisors where they would almost do anything to meet their metrics. There was a lot going on that we didn't know about, and a lot of this sort of spilled out in the process. So we took each one of our representatives, which would have been 80, to the consensus day, along with the directors, along with the facilitator, and pretty much, obviously we had a number of weeks notice as what was coming at us. So we pretty much, as a director team, had agreed going in, there's a lot wrong here. We need to go in the first 20 minutes and acknowledge and almost apologize for some of what's been going on, and that is what we did. So we went in, and it was a very emotional day now for a lot of people who were involved from the shop floor especially. And they were giving sort of stories, positive and negative, about what was going on in the organization that we weren't fully aware. So two things came out of this. One was a list of obstacles, and we got this down to sort of 9 key themes. And the second thing was, in terms of behaviors, we got a lot of different data points, and we set a group of maybe 20 people to go off separately and look at those behaviors that were there and come back to us. This was the sort of stuff that came up: lack of trust and respect, leaders' inconsistent performance, short-term thinking, shift pattern was an issue, obviously, et cetera, et cetera. So these were the obstacles that came up. So what we said we would do is we'd set up a project around each one of these, and we came up with 9 separate projects that would go and look at the issues that we had on the shop floor. And we call these obstacles to our future state. We had a separate group go away and look at our behaviors and our behavioral standards, and they worked with the facilitator over 2 or 3 days, and this is what they came back with. Now, I'm sure if you put a different group on it, they'd come back with something a little bit different, but it was the belief that the 2,800 people who were involved in that process had now these behavioral standards. So we then took these behavioral standards and we took 50 people from the organization, many from the shop floor, and we trained them up on a 1-week course to be facilitators, to go back then and facilitate sessions with all our staff, a 2-hour session, where they would basically bring the staff through these and basically answer questions and really sort of start the process of embedding them in the organization. And that was obviously a big exercise and took obviously a number of months before we could train behavioral facilitators and then roll it out in groups of 10. We rolled it out to groups of 10. So 2 facilitators would take a group of 10. So it was almost a full-time job for the facilitators for quite a number of months. The second thing we did was we set up 9 teams to go look at the 9 separate projects, like the absenteeism policy, like shift change, etc. And it was slow because it took a long time to select the teams and get them going. And then every quarter, pretty much, they put up a poster in the corridor, like a full-size poster, to educate people across the plant what was happening with the process. So there was a belief that the process was making progress. And we did make progress on pretty much all the issues. The other thing we did was we had a vision statement for the site. It was the usual sort of like 2-sentence, sort of great place to work sort of stuff. But we set another group up to go and set up what they wanted the plant to look like in the future. And after a number of weeks, number of edits, they came back with this. So the focus was on our company, our work, our community, and our patients. And you can see the commentary there. And this, because it came pretty much from the workforce, it wasn't a top-down, a lot of people took a lot of pride in the fact that it had come from the workforce. So the last thing we did was remember that the inconsistency of leadership was a problem. So we engaged in a process, a 6-day pretty much management training course for all 240 people managers we have on site. So we have 240 people managing on site who would come from many organizations. So there was a great inconsistency in what training they had. But the training was quite specific in that it was, this whole setting expectations, red line, be very clear to your employees, and also this sort of, there's no point in having 6 red lines if the person only has the capacity to do 4 objectives. Very much not overburdening people, because that was a key theme coming back from many of our engineering staff, was that we were pretty much laying on too much work. So very much around setting the red line, and that was a 1-day course. We had a 1-day course on recognition, how to do recognition, how to do it properly, how to do it well. And it was no good just being really good at recognition. You had this quality versus quantity theme as well. There's no point in being really good at recognition if you only do it once a year. It's building triggers into their daily routines that they would give recognition to the employees. So pretty much in all our stand-up meetings and in my staff meeting, every meeting we have on site, we'll always take 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes for recognition, so that we have the ability to recognize what's going on that day, that week. And that then gives me an opportunity. If someone says in my staff meeting, some technician came in on the weekend, it gives me an opportunity, if I see him in the corridor, just give him some recognition. And it just built a whole pile more recognition into the organization that was not there before. The third one then was this whole coaching and delegating. Now there's numerous coaching models out there. We pretty much brought everyone through this double diamond coaching model, which suited the mindset of the plant, because we have a lot of engineers, a lot of technicians. We would be 5-star in terms of problem solving, And the double diamond model, the first top part of it is diagnosis, when you're absolutely sure on what the problem is. The second part, second diamond then, is pretty much looking at your options and coming to a final solution. It suited the logic. And then the fourth one was constructive feedback. But a key theme we had in all of this was pretty much, if you have employees, you cannot just move into constructive feedback. You must earn the right to give constructive feedback, and you earn the right by setting expectations, giving regular recognition, coaching people where they need it, but you do not give constructive feedback unless you've been through that cycle. And the same then with escalation. You cannot move into escalation until you've moved from left to right. And that was a key theme that we've drilled into the organization over the last, so we've trained 240 people on this model in the last 15, 18 months. Okay, so they're the three elements of our Winning Together, our people engagement program. It's removing the obstacles, and probably 80% of that work is done. Behavioral standards is pretty much now in place, and we have regular refresh sessions with a lot of the employees. And the same with even though people have got the 6-day coaching, the 6-day sort of management training, every Friday pretty much there's a refresh session that can go for an hour and almost share examples of how they're getting on. So this pretty much is the basis of our people engagement program. In terms of organization design, we had to make some changes. So the supervisor that we had was managing 30 people. So basically we said way too much. So we took a lot of the more minor duties off them to leave them purely managing people. And we basically brought in what we call these line facilitator roles. So product builders, who probably 50% of the time is making product, but 50% of the time is helping out on the line on role jobs that the supervisor used to have to do himself. And we have our usual sort of standard work from the start of the shift, daily huddles, right up to the weekly core team reviews with the management team in that particular unit. So this would be a typical sort of stand-up meeting. We have a 20-minute meeting. You can see the clock here where we like our keep stuff on schedule. And you can see here at the back, there's probably quite a number of teams. There's probably 12 teams in this room. There's probably about 400 people in this whole area, but obviously we're running multiple shifts. But this would be a typical stand-up meeting where they're basically sharing the experience of the week, and it's much more now a forward-looking view than it would have been in the past, where we would have been looking back at the metrics, why they were red last week. Very much a forward-looking. And you can see a lot of problems. These boards slide back and forward so we could basically maximize our space. Obviously with clean room space, we have to maximize our space. So that's one of 20 continuous improvement areas that we put in the last kind of 2 years. So culture, lots of definitions of culture. This is the best one, or one I like best. So I've spoken a lot about people, but systems obviously important as well. So we're all familiar with sort of, process mapping, business process, whether it's a recruitment process or invoice processing, inputs, outputs. But what we've done the last couple of years, we've really looked at, okay, we can do the process mapping, we're really good at that, but what is a system? And these are all the key elements that we would say would be part of a system. The most important here in the top is what behaviors are we trying to achieve with the system? And that's what we have a whole tool around the assessment of a system, but in particular, what behaviors do you want to achieve? Obviously, you have to have an owner, and what are the triggers that drive those expected behaviors? There's other elements as well, but systems and the behaviors that drive are now a real focus for us in terms of what we're doing. You've seen the Deming quote, a bad system will beat a good person every time, and a bad system will drive bad behaviors. There is absolutely no question about it. So, just in terms of the Shingo sort of principles, these ideal results need ideal behaviors, which are driven by system design, people beliefs, and ultimately both of which are informed by principle. So that's the connectivity through what we've been doing. That you can take this for any one of the principles. I've just shown it here for one, but if you want quality at source, it's a different set of systems, it's a different set of behaviors that you're trying to drive in the organization. In terms of results, we've always been a high-performing sort of organization. This one here is good catches. So we've seen a big uplift in that in the last kind of 18 months on the back of our behavioral standards and the whole sort of cooperation that we're seeing on the shop floor. Quality, look, we get 3 complaints for every 1 million devices shipped. We are a Six Sigma organization. It's where we should be. But the really important one we've seen is HR grievance rate. That has dropped dramatically in the last kind of 15, 18 months. And that is really an outcome of what is happening is people still have a grievance, but they're much more likely to go to the supervisor and work it out with their supervisor. We actually give people a course on how to respectfully challenge. And that's actually a 2-hour course that we give a lot of. It's optional. We give to anyone who feels that they can challenge the supervisor. We actually give them a course on that. But that in itself is probably one of the best metrics. And then obviously cost improvement. We are aggressive in cost improvement. You know, we're nearly up at double-digit figures here in terms of cost improvement. So in terms of what's different, you know, clearly, you know, this is our purpose: saving, improving lives. We would push that more than we would have historically. We have our vision as well. We have behaviours are now talked about. So even if a behaviour is not necessarily on the behaviour standard, it's become more of a norm in the organisation, in any meeting or any interaction, that people talk about behaviours and think, is that behaviour acceptable or unacceptable? Continuous improvement workspace, I mentioned, we put those in place. Absenteeism has gone down by 30% in the last 18 months. We're really good at problem solving. You know, we do a lot of it. We need it in the industry that we're in. It's constantly changing, constantly moving. What we do now is we include a lot more product builders and folks on the shop floor, and even in many cases, they've been trained up to lead the 6-step problem solving events. And that not just for problem solving, but in terms of standard work, in terms of TPM, we're involving an awful lot more product builders. So in summary, we're really shifting our focus from managing people to managing processes and developing people. That's where we've sort of moved to over the last kind of couple of years. So things. Mass engagement process had a major impact. I mean, I got some techs who were very capable but super negative, and in the space of 2 years, they've completely flipped to where they're now coming forward ideas, suggestions, much more energetic. It's amazing. And the people, especially who've been trained as facilitators for behavioural standards, they would say that we've changed their lives because outside of work they're much more confident, etc., than they were previously. So we've improved engagement, but we are still conscious that we need to continue the opportunities to involve people at all levels. And obviously I mentioned systems, and that's going to be a big focus now for the next couple of years, is looking at all our systems and what behaviours that they actually drive in the organisation. So last slide, Simon, you'll be glad to know. So I saw this quote a few years back at a Shingo conference in Utah, it must be 4 or 5 years ago, and I really liked it. And it is, the more you work in terms of trying to change your culture, it is absolutely true. Now there are many dimensions to culture. You've got sort of high trust, low trust, you've got innovation, risk averse, etc. But in terms of people, the one I like best is this concept of a resistant culture versus a responsive culture, and this continuum where you are somewhere between it. So there's no question, I'd say we were mid-range, we've moved the dial. And I would say the single thing that has helped us move the dial in the organization is pretty much the conversations that we were having were very much parent-child type conversations. And we have moved, I would say, over the last couple of years from parent-child conversations to adult type conversations. And that, I would say, is the single biggest thing that has worked for us. And these sort of conversations, they take longer. You might not always get what you want, but ultimately, it's a better way to run a business. Okay, that's me. Any questions?
Culture had a Boston Scientific Ireland. Is that common to Boston Scientific around the world? I mean, what you've learned in Galway or other locations, have you transferred that learnings to any other plant?
So a number of the plants would follow the Shingo model. So the Cork plant, I mean, the Shingo Prize gets awarded maybe 1 or 2 companies every year globally. The Cork plant for Boston Scientific won the Shingo Prize about 3 months back. One of only 4 plants. The medical device is very strong on Shingo, very strong on culture. And 2 of our plants, one in the US and one in Costa Rica, got a silver award last year. So generally speaking, they would be strong in terms of culture. They don't necessarily all have the same approach. So we've taken this mass engagement approach. Other organizations take a different approach, but they would all be, I think, more tuned into culture than they would. If you're tuned into the Shingo model, you're very much tuned into behaviors, and hence culture. If you go back 10, 15 years ago, the Shingo model was very much a lean model. If you had 5S and standard work and all that, you would win a Shingo prize. But today is very much about culture, it's about behaviors.
If you were plucked up and come out of an operational plant into the construction industry, do you think this Shingo model would work, and do you think this whole process that you went through can be translated to the construction industry?
I don't know I don't know the construction industry, but I think it can be applied anywhere. I mean, everywhere has systems drive behaviors. Everywhere has managers who manage people. You either respect them, don't respect them. I mean, the behavioral element of this can be copied anywhere.
So you said that your behavioral standards could be anything depending on the mass of people you're working with, but also the continuum that you're working through. Are you going to review your behavioral standards?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So our consultant would like us to lock them forever. My own view is that, you know, if you look at some of our behavioral standards, it's you know, they are almost fixing a negative problem. Yeah, they're moving the needle. My own view is in a few years' time, you go back and look at them and modify them.
You have new people as well come in. Maybe.
Well, new people come in, they part of our induction in the first week, they get 2 to 4 hours on behavioral standards. So new people coming in, and the same with managers coming from other companies, regardless where they've been, what level, they will get the 6 days of training. So we will do both.
Retention, has your staff retention improved much?
It's difficult to say. Our attrition levels for permanent product builders will be very low, 2 or 3%. Attrition levels for technical staff is reasonably low, probably 4 or 5%, and we haven't really seen a change, despite a very competitive market at the moment in the medical device industry for engineers.
Okay, any last questions for Colm?
Obviously, there was a huge investment for the company, and everyone was talking about the big work going into it. How did the investment compare to the savings? Was the savings obviously?
You know, in culture, it's kind of not it's not a balance sheet type equation. I think it's paid for itself many times, 3, 4 times. But the trick is to sustain it. You know, to a certain extent, the project in itself generates a lot of interest, a lot of activity. With any of these programs, the challenge is to sustain it. We think we will, we think we can, but it does need attention. But to do a straight sort of P&L on it, it's never easy. But you know, when you look at absenteeism, HR grievances, I didn't show output, but what we are seeing especially, because we run 24/6, 24/7 on many of our lines, what we're seeing is that the shift finishing, say, at 3 o'clock is leaving the line in a much better state to almost set the next team up for success, whereas in the past, they were an awful lot more competitive. They were like, make their numbers in the shift, and not to hell with the next shift, but they wouldn't necessarily set the line up. What we're seeing is a much higher level of collaboration between the teams, and that this is positive. And this is turning up in basically output. So it has paid for itself many times.
Paid for itself in value, and it is as opposed to money.
Pardon?
As opposed to money, it's definitely paid for itself in value with the incentives.
Yes, yeah.
Is this behavioral pattern universal across the companies? Like, do they have similar kind of patterns? Or let's say you hire a person from a competitor company, like, and they have a completely different behavioral kind of setup. Is it universal? Like, you find that kind of values in many companies that don't have to be just medtech?
We can take people in from any industry, but we will bring them through. I mean, but people, when they come into an organization, they watch, right? What they do is they watch, and they see what are the norms, the behaviors in this company, and they adapt. So regardless almost where they've come from, they will adapt to the organization that they come into. That is typically what happens with many people. I think, going back to the question, it's better if you can start with your values and tag your behavioral standards connecting with their values. But because our values have been sitting on the wall for 10, 15, 20 years and hadn't really been changed, it's a little bit of a problem to just produce them. But ideally, the second problem you have with values is, especially in multinationals, you get a new CEO in 2 years' time and new set of values. So we were a little bit reluctant to tag them to the values. But if I was an Irish company, I would certainly take my values and then determine my behavioral standards on the back of them, assuming the behaviors that are the ones that you want to be successful for your strategy. So the behaviors need to connect with your strategy as well. So we want a lot more continuous improvement. A lot of the behavior we're trying to encourage is continuous improvement at all levels. So it depends on what behaviors you want to be successful in your strategy. I think that's my time, is it? That's my time.
Very good.
Very good. Thanks. Thank you.